Hello everyone. On behalf of Dimitris Davis, Stefan Pedersen, and myself, Agni Kalfagianni, welcome to this first webinar on the Exploring Planetary Justice series. This is the first webinar where we explore planetary justice within South America views on ecosocial justice. And we started this webinar series because intersecting social and environmental challenges are affecting and they are endangering the human and the non-human realms on Earth. And this has intensified demands for justice and also for different conceptualizations of justice, with some people proposing the term planetary justice. However, what exactly this term means, planetary justice, and whether this resonates with existing scholarship and practice of justice, especially in the ecosocial sense, is currently underexplored. So this is a joint initiative between the Planetary Justice Task Force of the Earth System Governance Project. The Earth System Governance Project is the largest social science research network on global environmental change research. And also in collaboration with the Center for Environmental Justice of the Colorado State University. And together we aim to establish an international network of researchers who are interested in exploring the place of planetary justice within their thinking on ecosocial justice. So we are conducting a series of webinars across different world regions under this title, Exploring Planetary Justice. During this webinar, participants are invited to address three main prompts, drawing on their own research and experiences. And at the end of the whole webinar series, we're going to explore, compare, and synthesize all these views. This is a 90-minute event where we have around 45 to 50 minutes for the participants to address the different prompts. And at the end, there will be time for discussion with the audience. So please put your question in the chat. The moderator today is Andrea Baudouin-Farah, who is an assistant professor at the Ecosystem Science and Sustainability Department at Colorado State University, and she will introduce the rest of the panel. Unfortunately, one of our panelists, Gretel Navas from the Department of Political Science of the University of Chile, is ill. But we have four other amazing participants who are going to give fascinating views on the topic. So I give it now to Andrea.
Thank you so much, Agni. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We are very excited about this panel. I'm sorry if my image maybe freezes. My camera doesn't really like Teams. But I'm very excited to present our four panelists today. We have Joel Correa, Assistant Professor in the Department of Human Dimensions of Natural Resources of Colorado State University, Veronica Corber Gonçalves, Professor in the Department of Economics and International Relations at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, Joaquina Rodriguez, Associate Professor from the School of International Development and at the University of East Anglia in the United Kingdom and part of DEV's Global Environmental Justice Group, and Andrea Zuri, full professor at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, Brazil, where she created the Group of Environmental Studies, GESTA. So it's a wonderful panel of experts who are working in, on, and from South America with very diverse backgrounds and topic areas of research and action with different communities. So we're very excited to hear their takes on eco-social justice and planetary justice, particularly in our region that has shared challenges with other areas of the globe, but also particularities in terms of its history and recent developments. So we're very excited to hear what they have to say about the three questions that we have asked them to address in this panel. So the dynamics for that will be that each will take turns to answering 3 up to 4 minutes each of the questions, and we'll address them by order and changing the order of responses as we move through the questions. So without further ado, I guess we'll start with the first question, which they have all been tasked to answer. And I'm sorry if you hear noise on the background. I came all the way to my office for it to be quiet. It seems to be works going on here in the department. So first question, and the order for answers to this one is going to be Joel, Veronica, Joaquine, and Andrea. What do you see as the major theoretical and political tendencies within eco-social justice in your region? Joel, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and for all the organizers and everyone in attendance today. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to join this conversation, and I'm also honored and humbled to be part of and in company of the other panelists and organizers whose work I really admire and have learned so much from. I also want to acknowledge the fact that I think any conversation of eco-social justice certainly needs to depart from a recognition, particularly from where I'm speaking, a recognition of indigenous dispossession and histories of settler colonialism. So I'm currently speaking from the Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is the ancestral and historic territories and homelands of Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute Nations peoples, as well as a crossroads for many other indigenous nations and peoples that have transited these areas for different purposes, and just want to recognize that from my perspective in the work that I do, recognition or contention with any sort of form of justice, eco-social or otherwise, has to also grapple with the histories and present of settler colonialism and what that means, and also the other forms of coloniality and colonial power, and what that means for the prospects of justice and how we might get there today. So today I want to think critically about the concept itself of eco-social justice, because I think doing so frames some of my current thinking on how I'll answer the question that's been posed to us to begin this conversation. And firstly, I want to say that I think the notion of eco-social is, in my mind, it's vital to think with. Much of the work, both academic and activist, that influences my thinking on this concept draws from Spanish or Portuguese framings of the word socioambiental or socioambiental, which translates roughly in English to the term socio-environmental posed as one word. And here, I think there's a very clear tradition of Latin American scholarship and intellectual thought within, but also especially outside of academia. And that thought is really grappling with questions of human relations with other than human natures, and that these kinds of traditions of intellectual thought and practice and praxis should be brought into considerations of this question today and the question of eco-social, if we're thinking from a place or a region, as in how this is framed with regard to views or perspectives from Latin America or from South America, and how that kind of like regional, geographic, or place-based thinking might inform the conversation that we're having today. So I think that binding the eco with the social is a vital framing from which to base a conversation of justice. And I say this because the very act of separating the eco from the social, or nature from culture, or human from the environment, is one that has facilitated epistemic and material violence, because such binaries lie at the root of colonial logics that divide and classify for the purpose of controlling people, populations, and space for extractive purposes and resource capture, as well as gendered projects historically and into the present. So in my view, the very concept of eco-social in similar framings moves us toward discursive and epistemological ways of attending to justice that from the start move away from the foundational violence of colonial binary logics. And so having said that and thinking with that, I also think it's important to really scrutinize the word justice, the concept, and think about what that might mean, as I see it as a goal of this broader conversation and series as well. So I should preface this by saying that much of my scholarship work and activism revolves around differing notions of justice, so it is a concept and political goal that I think is really important. However, a man named Milciades Gonzalez from the Sanapanan Enxle indigenous community of Zamocasec in the Paraguayan Chaco, where I've long worked and done in-depth research on indigenous resurgence and land restitution for nearly 10 years, he once made a comment to me that has forever really changed my thinking about justice, and it's something that I'm still grappling with, and I want to share it here in the hopes that it might further spur some of our conversation. And so Milciades, in thinking about the prospect of land restitution, following decades of dispossession and state refusal to uphold indigenous rights laws that could have provided some protections to his community, he once told me, quote, "We will always be scarred from what they have made us live through. I don't think that the land will bring justice, but it will help us find a sense of peace," end quote. And so Milciades' comments point to the limits of distributional politics and formal justice mechanisms in the face of settler colonialism and extractive violence. Milciades' comments that day have also made me think carefully about the very idea of justice, how it is attained, or if it is even really possible. Is justice an aporia in the sense that Derrida and Spivak have framed the concept, a non-passage, something that is a utopic horizon that we must strive for, but that is not really ever attainable? And if so, can we think of justice, or can we think of this sense of peace that Miltiades invoked as perhaps a more substantive or grounded way of envisioning the pragmatic limits of justice that move us toward an otherwise notion that might center eco-social well-being? And so to conclude and return to the original question, I understand the major theoretical tendencies that influence eco-social justice in the spaces where I work as intimately tied to what many might call a decolonial praxis. But this praxis is not rooted in academic framings of colonial politics, but tied to the politics of everyday resistance and indigenous resurgence, informed by transcalar processes that manifest as local challenges that many frontline communities face, yet are almost always in conversation with some sort of broader political economic dynamics, from which I think articulates that notion of planetary in planetary justice that also frames our conversation today. So thinking about the ways in which locally manifested injustices are often and very much in the South American and Latin American context, history, and present, articulated to broader political economic processes of extractivism and colonial logics. So I want to end it there, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share a couple thoughts on the question.
Thank you, Joel. That was very, very interesting. I had to take very fast notes. Thank you so much. Veronica, your turn. You have 4 minutes and make it a half so that we are in balance.
So, hi, can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So, thank you for the invitation. It's super nice to be here with you. And about this first question, in Brazil, in my view, eco-social justice theories have been profoundly linked to grassroots movements since 1980s. So the emphasis has been on social and environmental justice, advocating for both social equality and territorial rights. And as a counter-hegemonic movement, they address how global political economic process impact planetary system. So the academic debate on environmental justice in Brazil, as in other Latin American countries, attempt to move apart from traditional environmental justice concepts that often stem from Western perspectives, lacking emphasis on colonial and epistemic roots in Global South, as Joe was saying. So I would like to highlight that the theoretical debate on epistemic justice is crucial to recognize diverse knowledges, configurations in Brazil, and take into account the production of knowledge by grassroots movements that resist day by day. So in essence, an environmental justice perspective that encourages ways of knowing and being that respect different worlds and challenging unequal systems of dominance. And it entails considering struggles for justice on their own terms, recognizing the autonomy of local communities and reconfiguring relationships for equity and relationality and planetary integrity. And that's it. Thank you.
Am I next?
Thank you. Yes, Yoki, you are next.
Thank you. So I completely agree. Thank you again, as Joel said, for inviting us, and Veronica, thank you for creating this panel for conversation. I don't want to repeat what Joel and Veronica have said in relation to I think the uniqueness of the way that environmental or socio-ecological or eco-social justice is being approached in the region is its strong links with the colonial thought. And with no doubt with the fact that the colonial thought itself is very much rooted in real practice, and the movements are informing the development of theory. So we have concepts like buen vivir, the rights of nature, among many others that have been identified by the colonial thinkers and have been projected and turned into theory by people that write about this, but they're actually concepts that are emerging from movements among many others. So there's a big movement and singularity of theories emerging from movements that are influencing the way we write about it. but I wouldn't want to say that there is I think there's huge intersections between a lot of theories. So there is political ecology, political ecology, which is feminist, which is really has been very influential, particularly because of the huge surge of women's movements fighting for environmental and socio-ecological rights or social environmental rights in the region. This has also influenced a real expansion of feminist political ecologies that are also determining the shape, this fusion between the colonial thought and also political ecology. But there's also another field, and as you will know, Andrea, because we've worked on this, there's a huge bunch of people that are actually practitioners of conflict transformation or conflict resolution, that are practitioners of conflict management, that have been increasingly engaging with the colonial theory, trying to find a way of engaging more with power relations in this attempt to find socio-ecological, socio-environmental justice. So there are many influences. There are Latin American socio-ecological or socio-environmental or eco-social thought has a strong sort of imprint of the colonial thought, but I think it also has intersections with other bodies of knowledge that are emerging from the ground, but also people are trying to connect and make sense on how to really engage with the transformation of conflicts. And I think that is another very distinctive characteristic of Latin American environmental justice or sociological justice that I think Joel mentioned is our connection with praxis. So there is a very strong academic and activist nexus in Latin American environmental justice scholars who really are engaged in trying to use research as a tool for transformation. And that is also because we have strong connections with movements, but also because we have a social responsibility and ethical responsibility to produce change. And so there's a lot of participatory research connected to the type of research that we do, that we're trying to really help to use research as part of this cognitive justice process that Veronica was referring to, because we see research as that sort of tool that can help make invisible knowledges more visible. So I think that is another very clear distinction, not only of the theoretical underpinning, but also of the praxis underpinning of the way environmental justice or socio-ecological justice is done in the region. I think I'll stop there to let Andrea add some more things, which I think she's trying to really engage with. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Eugenie. Andrea, your turn. Have 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here and to get to know this very interesting group and network of young researchers. I spent the day yesterday writing down my answers and trying to figure out the time and everything. But you know, I don't know what happened. I lost everything. So I just sketched a few lines here. But what I will say is it goes really much in the same direction of what my colleagues have just said. So if I may add a few little lines, it would be like to give you a context of Brazil as well. Here in Brazil, policies of assimilation still reflect colonial views, as you have said, and practices. For example, by conceiving forests as empty spaces to be incorporated into the land market, and in the same key, by rendering indigenous peoples and traditional communities invisible while incorporating them into the unifying category of the poor through the forced displacements demanded in the name of development. The general argument in favor of this kind of territorial appropriation by capital emphasizes market integration through job and income generation as the only means to lift people out of poverty. In this way, numerous social groups are displaced and with the loss of the territories and livelihoods transformed into subjects of policies of income transfer. So territory dispute is a major issue in this country and in Latin America as large. The idea of development is very strong and mostly related to the advancement of the frontier over these lands of these people, indigenous and local communities, Quilombola and other what we call traditional communities. It is a movement to insert land into the marketplace. Intellectuals, researchers, and social movements in general face the challenge of contesting the coloniality of power and knowledge. An epistemological turn towards decolonial approaches seem to be necessary in order to dispute the prevailing concept of development, of governance, of sustainable development, of justice, and related categories. So I agree with most of what my colleagues said, and I will just stop now here. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you everyone for such critical and deep perspectives that link theory, but also the history of thought and praxis around these complex issues in the region. We'll circle back to a synthesis at the end, so I won't extend here too long. And we'll go to the second question, which is more related to precisely that practice and in the specific context of South America. So in order, we're going to start with Joaquine, then Andrea, Joel, and Veronica to address the question of what are the forces for or against eco-social justice in your region, in addition to the global or planetary levels. So there's the global and planetary level forces that could be pointed to in every region of the world, but there are also other more context-specific forces that either uplift or hinder eco-social justice in South America. So Joaquine, let's start with you.
Yeah, so it's a vast question, so it would be very difficult to synthesize in 4 minutes. But I think I'll try to answer with that one of the positive and at the same time the negative. So which is linked to the decolonial sort of project. There has been huge advances in the region over the last 2 decades in terms of transforming the nature of the nation state in many countries, and we see this still happening in Chile, attempts for changing the nation state, the constitution, to a more pluricultural one, with of course resistance to that. But there have been shifts in Bolivia, in Ecuador, in Venezuela to some extent, in terms of engaging with the political project of decolonization, of creating more plurinational nation states that would, in theory, allow for this concept of social, ecological, or eco-social justice to have more rooting. So that's a great sort of particularity of our region, and it's something that I know colleagues that work on this subject in Africa and other regions really struggle to engage with the pre-cultural politics that we have in the region. And I think that is something singular to Latin America, which could be an opportunity. But unfortunately, as we know, there are huge incongruences between the discourse of plurinationality and the practice, political and economic practice. So we still see a lot of basically top-down economics and development, reproducing the logic of development that Andrea was mentioning, which really creates tensions with the whole opportunities that plurinational politics could open in Latin America for that. And so that's one big structural opening, but at the same time limitation that we have in the region, that it determines how socio-ecological or eco-social justice struggles play out, because movements are still from the bottom up struggling and pushing for rights that have been opened in the legislations, but governments are still pushing from top down to continue to have monocultural societies. So that's one aspect that I'll just leave it there. I have a lot of things to say about how this takes shape at the local level as well, but if we have time, I'll be happy to expand on that later, but I'll leave it for my colleagues too. Maybe they can do that.
Thank you, Joaquine. Andrea, your turn. You are muted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Joaquine. I agree with you. And I believe that more, strictly to identifying agents, the forces which are against eco-social justice, I believe that they are represented by agents related to neo-extractivism, which compiles mining and agribusiness, basically. So these forces have an immense impact over domestic issues, domestic politics, and systems of regulation, and systems of justice as well. So today, mining and agribusiness represent the majority of the seats in the Brazilian parliament and are associated with conservative sectors of the society and religious groups like part of the evangelical church. They also control part of the mainstream media. So if on one hand you have a so-called or self-called progressive government, in executive politics, in the parliament is completely conservative. And for social justice, we can identify it in a variety of social and environmental movements, such as indigenous and quilombola movements, networks against mining, the Via Campesina, members of the Progressive Catholic Church, intellectuals and researchers with connections with the grassroots and also political networks of researchers, urban and rural movements involved in the experience of agroecology and buen viver. These ideas of agroecology, another type of agriculture, and the idea of the protection of the commons and buen viver is very strong in the region and may point out some ways out of this end of the world, to put it in Ailton Krenac's words. And Ailton Krenak is an indigenous writer in Brazil, and he wrote a book which is called Ideas to Postpone the End of the World. So maybe these are some movements working in the postponing the end of the world, in their world specifically. I will stop here. Thank you. Improvising.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andrea. I'm so sorry you lost your notes. That's so frustrating.
Yeah. It was very organized, but anyhow, it's okay.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine. Your turn, Joel.
Thanks so much. Yeah, there's so much to think with in this question, and so much complexity here and nuance, and I don't want to repeat what colleagues have said, but also want to echo it and say that I completely agree and am in alignment with those perspectives and analyses. I think that the way that I'll take some of my comments on this one is to think about it as well from, I think there's for me, one of the first words that came to my mind in thinking about forces for eco-social justice is solidarity, and solidarity at different scales. And I think that for me, one thing that's remarkable as well is like thinking about the deep forms and intimate forms, dynamic forms of solidarity within, across South America, Latin America. It's hard to generalize because there's always so many distinctions. It's worlds within worlds. We're talking about like a vast cultural, historical, economic, ecological diversity that I hesitate trying to generalize a specific response to, but I do think that the question of solidarity is one that is predominant in so many places, and particularly among like grassroots movements and frontline communities of all different sorts and types, but then also thinking about that kind of solidarity and not only within a communal kind of network and strength of like a communal process and communal visioning that often takes place, not always, and it's definitely fragmented and fractured across different geographies and sites and times, but nevertheless thinking with that kind of communal solidarity and how that extends as well to this idea of the deep tradition and really strong kind of currents of praxis. So linking between academia and social movements, of thinking with concepts from social movements, from the front lines, from communities, from organic intellectuals that have really influenced academic scholarship and then pushed forward different kind of debates around some of these issues, and thinking about that as a form of intellectual solidarity that also, I think, manifests a lot of times as a material practice and change that helps work and move forward different sorts of social processes and change. So I think that solidarity we can think with in a lot of different ways. It's not always complete by any means, but I think to me it's one thing that is it spurs a lot of hope. And I think that it also is something that on an everyday level is something that moves forward a long-term, generations or centuries-long forms of resistance, of thinking, of trying to move toward a different way of being, an alternative pathway, if you will, from like a colonial and extractive logic. And there are openings and places where that closes, but I think that it's that question of solidarity to me, and particularly it's stark because I see, it's not to say that it doesn't exist within the United States and some of the geographies that I transit up here, but it is to say that it's very different, I think, in the US. And I think some of that has to do with the predominance of a neoliberal, like rugged individualism, the idea that we need to all be like on our own, doing our own thing, producing our own brand, if you will, or your own kind of like project. Whereas it's not to say that that doesn't exist within South America or Latin America, but it is to say I think that when I'm thinking about the type of work that I've been doing and the thinking with frontline communities, the question of solidarity is much stronger, and also across sectors. So within non-governmental organizations and people working to kind of align with and support frontline communities, as well as academics and intellectuals in those kinds of processes. So to me, that's like very key. It's that solidarity and the resistance then that comes from that and through the intellectual praxis. That's a force for. And I want to, I think that there's so many ways to point to like forces against, and so I'm going to try to stay more on the forces for eco-social justice, because I think that we can also point to many from different forms of colonial logics and settler colonialism, or the extractive imperative in its many different forms, patriarchy and the forms in which gender relations come through or reworked, and the forms of masculinities that come in through and out of this kind of extractive imperative and colonial logics, and how that also manifests in different forms of deeply rooted socioeconomic inequality. Those are all like very present forces against eco-social justice, but nevertheless also are intimately tied to these forms of resistance and resurgence that we also see. And I guess I'll just close by saying that perhaps a force against eco-social justice as well might be like resurgent authoritarianism, right? So we see these wonderful like examples of potential of like reimagining the nation state and what it can be that I think are vital and hugely important. But then there's this constant kind of resurgence here and there of very polemic actors and strong currents of authoritarian thought. And that's not just in South America, it's also, of course, in the United States and other places in the world. And it's a contention, I think, that is global in many regards. So I'll just end there, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Joel. And last but not least, Veronica.
This is a great question, and it was great to listen to you, Joe and Andrea and Eugenia. I mean, it's great to think with you on that. And so I guess forces against eco-social justice in Brazil in 2023 includes still very powerful narrative advocating for the right of development. And the scenario is more complex because Brazilian traditional elites advocate for the right to development, but show very little commitment to a notion of national development. I don't know what that is, but it's not even that. They are more interested in lobbying for a predatory type of development based on agribusiness and mining export, and aiming to strengthen their role in global supply chains as commodity suppliers. So they also lobby very effectively against environmental legal constraints. So as well documented, the aggressive expansion of agribusiness directly changes the territorial rights of indigenous and traditional populations, as Andrea mentioned, quilombolas. So, but on the positive side, forces for eco-social justice act as agents for sustainability, bringing diverse ways of knowing, living, and being. And I guess I'll keep repeating that, because they resist predatory development with their bodies, I mean, in their day lives. And also, they present alternative worldviews. So listening to voices from various worlds becomes a crucial pathway to envisioning a safe and just planet for both humans and more than humans. So their resistance provides insights into different ways of conceiving the world and well-being. And in the face of a strong opposition, these agents for sustainability challenge the prevailing narrative and offer inspiration for a more equitable and environmental conscious future. So these two major forces, they are expressed in Lula's government, in the Brazilian government at the moment. We have a unique, beautiful, very representative Ministry of Indigenous People, an Indigenous woman, an Indigenous leader. We have a Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, which is also a really important person in Brazilian history, I mean, Marina Silva. But at the same time, we have in Lula's government, agribusiness and mining interests very well represented, as Andrea said. So what is and where is the limit for this conciliation? And these forces, they are in dispute at the moment in our political agenda. So for example, at COP28, we see at the same time Brazil trying to lead some kind of forest governance and like going to OPEC plus. So what is the limit for that? I guess we have to find out until COP30, so we know which face of Brazil we present to the world. That's it.
Thank you so much, Veronica, and thank you, all of you wonderful panelists, for so much thoughtful examples that link back also to the first question in trying to understand what are the driving forces of increased eco-social justice, even if it's non-ideal forms of justice, but working towards more eco-social justice in a context of so much structural and so much structural forces against eco-social justice that are embedded in all of these different systems, from the local to the global. But I feel inspired just by hearing your emphasis on the forces for eco-social justice and how much it's kind of a reminder of the thriving diversities and expressions of these different movements and different ways of being on Earth that are just help us see that there are ways to decolonize our imaginaries and envision different ways beyond capitalism and these unsustainable relations between human and other forms of nature. Let's move on to the last question, and the order for answering this one will be Andrea, Joaquine, Veronica, and Joel. And this question kind of tries to take these realities, these regional realities that we've been discussing, and putting them in the context of global and planetary movements for justice. So has the concept of planetary justice, or something similar, even if it's not phrased in those terms, found its way into South America, in this region, and how, in which ways, and how do you understand planetary justice? Let's start with Andrea.
Okay. I'm keen to learn about the meaning of planetary justice. What do you mean by planetary justice? I would like to learn more about this, but anyhow, if I can relate to this, I would put it in a context here in Brazil, the discussion about environmental justice, which I think it's the close we can get from perhaps what you mean by planetary justice. During the 1990s, social scientists and movements, they somehow were captured by the idea of harmony, cooperation, participation, prosperity, as proposed by the ideology of sustainability and sustainable development, and also globalization. This was the 1990s. However, these promises were not met, and soon it became clear the aggressive invasion of neo-extractivist frontiers of mining, agriculture, and as well as associated transport and energy infrastructure projects in the lands of and ecosystems here in Brazil, lands of local people, indigenous people. So of environmental conflicts, I think this is an important concept, environmental conflicts, arose involving indigenous peoples and traditional and quilombola communities, large and small farmers, fishers, social movements, and environmental organizations. The concept of social environmentalism, as already mentioned here, and also political ecology approaches gained momentum among groups of researchers and organizations of civil society. So the debate about environmental conflicts was centered in issues of environmental inequalities, power relations, and environmental racism, as well as the recognition of the role of ethnical groups in the front line of the conflicts. In 2001, a network of environmental justice, Brazilian network of environmental justice, was created by combining researchers and several different social and environmental organizations. So I believe that this movement, which is very diverse in itself, perhaps is closer to the idea of planetary justice. But I want to hear more about what planetary justice means to you people. I myself must say that I have doubts really about the use of large categories, abstract big words such as planetary and global, as global environmentalism, planetary justice. Sorry, but I have really doubts about this when speaking about the environment inequalities, because of course things are connected in scale, in different scales. Now we must consider that in our analysis, and we must consider that also in our political activities, practices. But abstract and general categories usually evoke single unities, like the planet, the globe, the global, the environment, in a way that it has an effect of hierarchical effect that usually renders small and local processes invisible. So I like to make this provocation here, because everything that comes from global is more important than local. Everything that comes from the bigger categories are more relevant than small petty demands, really considered minor in face of greater issues. So I believe that power relations and diversity must be considered when evoking global levels. And also that justice is not only about distribution, justice is about also considering an element of difference, the rightful thing to the people, so that group can really reproduce themselves in social and economic terms and cultural terms. And I don't know if I'm clear enough here, but I have written about it. It's very difficult to say it in a few words in so short time, but this is a provocation. So what is what is the consequence for what does planetary justice helps us now, or what kind of limitations it has as well? How can we consider power relations when we're speaking about that? Don't we really take the risk of erasing local processes, obliterating local processes? That's what in my whole life, 40 years of research, I have witnessed. So speaking very, very frankly here, I will stop by now and see what we can develop in the debate.
Thank you, Andrea, for the provocation. I think it is very important to think about that and those tensions for sure. Yuki.
Yeah, well, again, but couldn't agree more with Andrea. I think, yeah, there is I would say an appeal to this idea of searching for planetary justice, in the sense that we could imagine that it would open conversations about the inequitable injustice, the distribution of inequities between the global south and the global north, and that to take more account about how the global south is really having a bad deal in the current development trends. But there is also the big danger of deviating the attention from the struggles that movements are really facing on a day-to-day basis. And I have also, before planetary justice, which is also a new concept for me, I've had this problem with climate justice as well, and indigenous peoples being drawn into the movement or the search for climate justice. Although it is true that, of course, marginalized indigenous communities and rural communities are more exposed to the impacts of climate change. Having the focus on climate justice takes away the whole history of struggles for territorial rights and autonomy that indigenous movements have been fighting for, among others. And I have had conversations with indigenous colleagues that I work with about even a problem with the concept of environmental justice or socio-ecological justice, because it completely decenters the conversation from another concept of justice that's more close to indigenous peoples, which is indigenous justice or divine justice, which are concepts that are more in tune with the cosmogony and the way that communities organize the rule of law. So if you're aspiring to a liberal notion of justice, then your own sort of form of justice, where is it? So we have the danger of, when we appeal to these broad categories, as Andrea is saying, decentering the struggles that indigenous peoples are really, or other local communities are trying to fight, to really have their own knowledge systems respected in the wider society. So I think there is a problem. I was only reading today as well some things about what planetary justice is, and I was looking at this framework that Frank Bierman and Agni Kafkagiani are proposing. I found it very interesting in the journal Earth System Governance, that they are trying to really grapple with this idea of representing plural visions of justice in a notion of planetary justice. But again, they completely miss the fact of the decolonial discussion that we're having in Latin America, that is not present at all in the way that planetary justice is being discussed, from what I see globally. So I would like to see more discussion on if there is an attempt to really represent a form of justice that takes into account human and non-human life forms, which I think is great. Also taking into account plural notions of justice, to really engage with the colonial theory, the colonial environmental justice that is so proper from the region in Latin America, and also how indigenous scholars and thinkers and philosophers also engage with justice, which is completely absent from much of the conversation that we have. And even the concept of socio-ecological justice or eco-social justice doesn't do justice to other notions of justice that should be part of the conversation as well. I'll stop there as well. Sorry if I extended myself too much.
If I have to be honest myself, I haven't been tracking time because you all are so good.
Yeah.
So we're perfect timing. Joel.
Well, yeah, there's so much there. I think just to kind of, I don't want to take up too much space on this question. I think it's really important, but I also think that, resonating with both of the previous comments, this is the idea and notion of planetary justice is new to me. I think that there is much caution and concern to be thinking about the questions of scale and the ways in which difference and nuance and the texture of social resistance and lived experience can be kind of just wiped out by broader categories and hegemonic kind of like, I'm not saying this is hegemonic, but a broader category that flattens some of the difference. On the one hand, there's an aspirational goal to that broader category that I think is really important, as other folks have said, but I also think, again, there's that caution of flattening out like the very real and differentiated struggles of people in different places, in different times, and for different reasons that we have to be really careful and attend to. Part of this in the previous comments really made me think about kind of where I opened as well is the question of justice itself, and oftentimes where the concept itself is rooted so firmly in a liberal notion of justice. So in some way, shape, or form, like this idea of justice in a way kind of represents like some sort of commensurate or commensuration between like a harm and then something that comes after that harm that creates a commensurate outcome that then can like absolve, at least to a certain degree, the harm such that we arrive at justice. But I think that idea, the conceptual kind of like process itself, is indeed flawed. So it's not to say like we have to like strive towards something that is justice, towards something that is a fair or a better way of being for people, because there are very real injustices. But nevertheless, this concept of justice itself, I think, might not get us as far as hopeful that people really want it to go. And so I think that much of that has to do with like the very deep ties of the concept of justice to liberal political theory and the ways in which it's enacted oftentimes. With regard to the specific question about like how has concept of planetary justice found its way into my region or where I work, I do most of my work, I didn't mention, in Paraguay and more recently in the Ecuadorian Amazon, but no one is really using this kind of concept of planetary justice, at least in the context that I've been working in Paraguay or the Gran Chaco or even in the Amazon. But I do think that there are justice struggles and concerns that articulate much more broadly beyond the region, and that maybe are informative to some degree to the conversation around planetary justice, insofar as that many of the indigenous communities and peoples with whom I've been working for quite some time and their allies are using and leveraging like international or Inter-American Court of Human Rights, these broader bodies of rights to articulate demands for justice that are very much closely tied in some regards to like this liberal notion of justice. But then that creates a sort of like political opening and tool that is used for a certain purpose that opens up or enables a pathway of the sense of peace that Milciades was talking about that I kind of opened with. So I think that there's interesting and important ways to think about and critically question this concept of justice, how it's used, if the planetary is like the way in which it should be framed, or if it's also about looking at the resonances across scale from different kinds of processes that are already taking place, that communities, movements, their allies and others are using to kind of push forward more just futures or different ways, alternative pathways to being that are outside of basically what I view as like the source of much of this broader injustice that we're discussing, which is that extractivist, colonial, really like the capitalist project of resource accumulation and differentiation and promoting that over time. So I think just to close really quickly, because I don't want to take too much time, is I had a conversation last night with a collaborator and colleague from a Secopai indigenous territory in the Ecuadorian Amazon, and we were just talking about some of the things that he's been working on, and he told me that he is in university right now. This has just happened in the last couple of weeks. He decided to go to university, and he's helping facilitate the community's processes for educación propio. So like their own like form of education and cultural revitalization that they can push forward their own ways of being and thinking, and that he has gone to university to learn tools to be able to do that through a certain type of pedagogical praxis. And to me, that's like a really important form of justice, in that a community process to get to the point to where they're working through this question of educación propio and thinking about the ways in which promoting and driving their own vision of education and the way of being, and for a cultural revitalization and resurgence, to me, is really important. And it articulates to the planetary injustice because their territories are situated within a site of intensive extractive development for oil extraction, but also like palm oil expansion and all these broader processes, and the intense focus on the Amazon and the role of indigenous peoples, especially more recently, but also articulating back to the 90s as like the saviors of biodiversity or climate change, and now these new responsibilities placed on indigenous peoples in the context of climate justice globally, and thinking about those debates. And so I'm kind of going on a tangent, but I guess my point is I think that we rethinking and critically questioning on these ideas of justice from the planetary, I think it's somewhat problematic in bringing us back to these questions about these very real struggles for different forms of a sense of peace or pushing forward community visions through things like educación propio or other pathways of thinking about how we might move forward toward more just futures.
Thank you, Joel. And Veronica, sorry, I skipped you. I glanced too quickly over my prompt. But you have the
No, no,
final
it's fine.
word.
Is it possible to show a slide that I sent to Camille? Camille, is it possible? I mean, it's just one. Please don't worry.
I think it should be. I would need technical support. There you go.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you, Camille. So I have been discussed these things a lot with Thais Ribeiro and Cristina Inoue, two beautiful collaborators, and we have been discussing the utility of this concept of planetary justice. And first, there aren't many publications, actually, I couldn't find any in Portuguese or in Brazil using the concept of planetary justice, except one book from a research group from University of São Paulo, working on planetary health, planetary justice connection. But it's, I mean, it's just one. But there is a very robust body of literature on global social ecological challenges that impact both human and non-human realms on Earth. And we think that this opens a dialogue with this concept of planetary justice. So the slide, so Thais did that. She searched on Cielo Brasil, which is a Brazilian database, and she found and she searched for planetary justice and we couldn't find any, and then environmental justice. So if we see these connections, these 9 clusters of words that occur at least 2 times at Cielo basis. So the term environmental justice and human rights and human rights associated with vulnerability, environmental racism, social justice linked to basic sanitation and water governance and conflicts and mining. I mean, you can read that. But maybe planetary justice can be a concept not in a canonic way, Andrea, not like in a super strict sense that it could solve things, but planetary justice may embrace like things that are not really explicit in the environmental justice concept. So this is not like to postpone one for the other, like, but maybe if we talk about planetary justice, we can also talk about these different worlds, about like taking apart from a social environment perspective that maybe could put these 2 things apart, environment versus society. And if we could like talk about planetary justice, taking all these connections together, maybe this could add something to the debate. Maybe that I'm not like super certain on that. We are not, I would say. So the environmental justice literature, like this cloud here, may offer a more grounded planetary justice framework, as it stresses the need to identify drivers for planetary injustice and recognizing the impact of the global social metabolism on resource demands and waste generation. And secondly, by focusing on resistance of local communities and indigenous people, like our environmental justice literature in Latin America, it highlights the need for broader recognition, diverse institution, and new perspectives on planetary justice. So maybe planetary justice could be a concept to refer to these different worlds that exist. I don't know.
Thank you so much, Veronica. I love that there's I don't know if it's a debate, but some debate going on, like critical perspectives on the dangers of these all-encompassing abstract concepts that can erase the local, that can erase difference, and that can be easily co-opted, as many things have been in the past, as many concepts have been in the past, and sometimes end up being tools of oppression rather than of emancipation and reivindication. But on the other hand, there's a possibility for them to engage with this diversity, with all of these local issues, and sort of outline some of the commonalities in the drivers that are rooted in these broadly encompassing colonial histories, globalization, capitalism, patriarchy, that are processes that resonate differently across the world and across different geographies and times, but they do present common challenges, and starting to link these issues through common frames can also be powerful. So I really enjoy hearing you all and your different perspectives on the limitations, but also some of the potentials for these encompassing global concepts. Before synthesizing kind of some of the, it's a hard task that I have to kind of synthesize all of the depth and thoughtfulness that you've put into answering these questions. We are going to have some space for you all to answer and address some of the questions that we've had from the public, which I understand are many that have been shared with us through the chat. So Stefan or Dimitris, do y'all have a synthesis of the questions for our panelists that they can answer?
Okay. One of the comments is, could you please repeat your thoughts on the book, Ideas to Postpone the End of the World? Whoever wants to. And I let Andrea facilitate.
I think that one is for you, Joel, right? No. Oh, wasn't
I think it's for Andrea. Andrea. Yeah, I think you cited that book. Yeah,
sorry. I think I've mentioned this book because when we were talking about theoretical and knowledges and decolonial knowledge, and I brought about this book of Ailton Krenak, which is an indigenous leader from the Krenak people, and he's a writer. Very influential writer here in Brazil nowadays. Some of his books were already translated, I believe, into English. And in Portuguese is Ideias para Adiar o Fim do Mundo. So I translated freely, Ideas to Postpone the End of the World, because that's the way it is written in Portuguese. And I think it's a nice thing to read, his ideas. He criticizes the idea of sustainable development. He criticized the idea of humanity, who belongs to humanity, and things like that. So it's a good person to read in this inspiration for coming from outside academia. And yeah.
The next one is from Mirja. She very much agrees on the skepticism towards broad generalizing concepts. And the planetary crisis implies a conceptualization of a particular process that does not take into account a much longer socio-environmental crisis that has been taking place since the colonization period. And I think that may also, yeah, any comments on that?
Who would like to take a shot?
Well, I don't think that I think it's sort of in a way reiterates what we've been saying, but from a historical perspective, rather than just a theoretical perspective of engaging with the colonial theory, is the fact that there is a historical process of dispossession that has been going on and is being reproduced continuously. And so a concept that planetary is justice that doesn't engage with the historical roots of injustice, it would be incomplete. So I think, yeah, thank you very much for adding that historical dimension as well, apart from theoretical. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on that, but.
We have a bunch of comments and questions, so we can keep moving, or you can comment.
Can I comment? Can I make a question here? Can I make another provocation? If we are to draw on an agenda for planetary justice, what we would include, what topics what priorities? What would be the priorities for a planetary justice? This is one provocation. And who draws this agenda? Who negotiates, and who is allowed, and who has the power to choose what kind of topic would be first and second? For example, I'm glad to hear here that environmental justice Veronica brought about is related to sanitation. For example, most of the people here, including myself, we work with local people, ethnic groups. I work with the impact of environmental licensing, large projects over local communities, and the way it is, a kind of epistemological violence, as well as material violence, and all sorts of violence when people have to be displaced from the territories in order for mining and large dams and so on to be constructed. So I have done that my whole life as an anthropologist in the territories, on the ground, researching and acting along with this resistance movements of these people. So, but sanitation, urban sanitation, most of the cities of Brazil have no basic sanitation. It's a huge problem. Cities of millions of people, they don't have basic sanitation in the northeast and in the north of the country. So millions of people. Is this a local issue or is this a global issue? Who is to define what is global and what is local, and why? What is the priority? Why basic sanitation isn't a global problem? Why isn't the World Bank and the UN or several other programs given priority, and that is to say money for projects for basic sanitation, for example, in South America? This is a provocation.
Anyone would like to react or add to that provocation that Andrea poses for us?
I think I might just react and add just a little bit. I think it's a wonderful provocation, a very important point. And just my immediate reaction is thinking about your comment about like, why isn't this a global priority? Made me think of sustainable development goals. And then it made me think of like what actual action happens on those and where does money actually go? And then it made me think about like global priorities. So your question about like, why isn't this a global priority? What is, who makes the agenda? And it made me think about like, so sanitation, millions of people, but does it make money essentially to invest in sanitation for millions of people versus putting money toward a different kind of like sustainable development agenda that might actually, under the guise of sustainability, advance like an extractive logic. You know what I mean? So like, it's more of like mine is, I'm thinking of it in a very cynical kind of way as well, to say that I agree, it's extremely important. Why isn't it a global priority? My cynical kind of response and quick perspective would be that probably because it doesn't generate resource extractive opportunities in the same ways that perhaps like REDD+ or like forest conservation initiatives that might save the forest, but also create a new market out of carbon that all of a sudden like people can invest in and make lots of money in, these types of like processes that it's like, okay, we'll move toward a sort of planetary justice that achieves like a broader end of like conserving carbon and climate change mitigation at the global scale, but in the very local actually is quite problematic nevertheless, but is advanced in a very kind of like specific way because it does still continue to generate income. So from my perspective, theoretically, and also just kind of, from that perspective, it's really tied, of course, to like political economy, and thinking about the ways in which like what kind of political economies are pushing forward the solutions or approaches to, I hesitate to use solution as a word, but like the approaches toward these kinds of broad global problems, right? And I think that your provocation is a really important one, and it just kind of triggered that reaction in me at the moment. So I'll stop there.
There's maybe related to this, and I'm going to come, there's a question about democracy and new extractivism, but related to the discussion we're having, there's a comment here that I agree to a degree about the criticism of big concepts, says the guest. On the other hand, we are all interdependently connected globally, which means that environmental policies cannot work if they are just focused on a local or national level, because any kind of local and national policies have effects, for instance, along value chain of product. Not including these interdependencies organized by power relations leads to nationalism. So the ecological crisis is a relationship between the local and the global. So just not to, you can read the rest of the comment, but it raises a very important question on the fact that the local and the global, or the national and the global and the planetary, are mutually constituted. And is there any comments on that?
I don't want to take up too much space, and I just spoke, but will throw out there because I think it resonates with this comment, and it also Andrea's last comment about like who decides, who's at the decision-making table. COP28 is taking place right now. It's in Dubai. Who are the hosts of that conference? What are the broader kind of agendas behind the financing of that conference? What kind of conversations are taking place there? And the reason why I bring that up is because it's very much a global or planetary scale conference and an initiative, organization of people to try to attend to some of the greatest challenges of our times in some ways, but nevertheless, like there are very important questions about like who is making decision, who is speaking there. I saw an image last night of 140 invited speakers, only 14 were women. And so like just like who is very much like who is at the table and making these kinds of decisions and enabled to influence these processes. I think coming back to what Andrea said, she said it in a way that's much more eloquent than I've just said it. But I think that that's a really vital piece of that. So it's not an answer, but it is just a point to like a very contemporary process that's taking place as we speak as well, related to the question. And I don't know if any other panelists want to jump in or take that further.
May I?
Yeah. Please.
Yeah. It's a super interesting discussion, debate, and I was thinking that environmental justice, at least in Brazil or in Latin America, it is now mobilized as a political agenda. So grassroots movements, they talk about environmental justice meaning something, and of course we don't have that with planetary justice, but that doesn't mean that the concept of environmental justice is perfect or explained everything, and it means something, and it's really important, for example, for local struggles, and it's politically relevant. But I'm not sure if it's like solved, or if we could put other elements on that. For example, it's really rooted on the debate about inequality, which is super important. It's fundamental. But maybe if we could open that and think about, for example, like ontological and epistemological challenges involved in this environmental justice concept, and how is it sufficient to embrace these different worlds, for example, or when we talk about environmental justice, are we talking about one environment or different ways of relating with the earth? So I do believe that we have common challenges, and one of these challenges is to recognize plurality of worlds, and that's it. I'm not trying to defend the concept. I don't have like a canonic perspective on that, but I think I think it would maybe like put some things on the table.
Okay.
Dimitris, maybe I could jump in and address the next question. So someone called JHH is asking that how do you deal with the problem of democracy in the sense of population in various countries voting for leaders that endorse neo-extractivist projects? And this addresses a really important question, I think, when it comes to planetary justice as a concept to think about. This is, because indigenous groups and local communities are not dominant in the political sphere, so they face constraints in making their voice heard in political institutions. So I was just wondering if anyone on the panel could try to say something. How do we deal with problem of democracy? And maybe try to think about how that could be related to the planetary dimension that we are trying to, address here as well.
I think if I can say something, but it's a complex question, but just one way of answering it is, it's not true that indigenous peoples are small numbers. In Latin America, the proportion of indigenous populations is huge. There are countries that have more than 60% of population are indigenous, like Bolivia and Guatemala. So it's not true that it's a number problem. And in fact, indigenous peoples have managed to shift the political agenda substantially in the region through democratic means to change the models of the nation states. So I think we have to be cautious about saying that indigenous peoples, first of all, are not powerful because they're small, or because the politics are local, or because it's difficult to change the political systems at a wider scale, because this has happened. History has shown that this is possible. But I do think that we do have a challenge in the region, which is very dramatic, and I don't think any of us have answers to this at the moment, is that we are seeing a turn to the authoritarian regimes, even within countries that have turned, as I said before, to plurinational politics. I would like to think that environmental movements, not only indigenous, but sort of the environmental movement as such, can unify people from different sectors and genders and all that to push, or other, other groups, that the search for justice and transformation of the world can become a more of a global agenda, and not only sectorized by, if it's indigenous or women or whatever. But anyway, I don't have an answer to what do we do with democracy. I just wanted to make clear that it is possible to shift political agendas if movements are strong enough. But the thing is that I think that the politics that we're seeing in Latin America and global are very dirty. We have a breakdown of institutionality, democratic institutions, and rule of law, which is making the effect of movements in influencing policy very difficult, because we don't have any more who to resort to really make democracy function. And this is very problematic, because it's strategically being developed to limit the potential of civil society having an influence in democracy. This is the big challenge that we have. And I think, going back to Andrea's words at the beginning, there is a very strong, very well articulated infrastructure of dismantling democracy, which I don't know. I think we have to really get our heads together to think how to counterbalance that, because it's not. We're at the moment, I think we're also startled and worried. But I think Brazil's example, maybe you went from a pretty crazy president back to Lula again, giving more hope, to give more visibility and voice and agency to movements and integrating them into politics. So I mean, it's dynamic, it changes. Latin America is like, it's never ever moving all the time. We never thought that we'd have a socialist president in Chile. Now we have one. Colombia as well. Venezuela is authoritarian, turned to authoritarianism after having been the promise of the region at the beginning of 20 years ago or 30. So I don't know. I mean, it's just movement all the time. But yeah, just some ideas on that question.
Yeah, but can I just add something? It's good.
Of course.
The idea of right and left and progressive and conservative governments concerning what we are dealing here with, the environmental issues, etc. It's not really a good reference. You know what I mean? Of course, Lula is better than Bolsonaro in many ways, but he's also a developmentalist. He's also pro-development. He was president for 2 terms. So government, they have this, Maristela Svampa has spoken about this consensus, commodity consensus in Latin America. And now she's speaking about decarbonization consensus, which I'm very interested to read about. I haven't read about it yet, but I have been concerned about this discourse on decarbon, or the carbon market as a means to provide even environmental justice. There is a danger there that perhaps in planetary justice, they say, well, the market is dealing with it by exchanging carbon, by selling carbon. So there's a sense of justice being played here. I don't know. I'm really concerned about it, and ideas about good governance and ESG governance, ESG ideas, environmental social governance, which many of the mining companies are speaking about now. Most of them are speaking, are engaged in mechanisms of applying the ESG principles here in Brazil, and also I think the idea of democracy. So everything in paper, everything is designed to seem open, to seem democratic, to seem participative, but in practice, they are extremely oppressive and violent, because people are invited to participation, for example, which is a principle for democracy, only to say yes. So things are, system of regulations, they are designed to make, we have, for example, environmental reports, we have public hearings, we have all these mechanisms of participation and institutional, doing, which is globally designed. But in practice, when you go to a public hearing, I have spent like 14 hours in a public hearing for a mining project. And at the end, we know what the result is. So people speak, but nobody hears. Nobody listens to them. They don't listen to the researchers like myself. We are there, we speak, we have a voice there, but nobody listen. You know what I mean? So we have a scene of democracy. We have a playground of democracy, but not really democracy. So we need to go deep into these processes to understand. And I don't have an answer for this. I'm just telling what happens at the ground, on the ground here, in practice, in reality, in experience. Of course, local knowledge is completely disregarded as obsolete, as non-qualified knowledge. But not even anthropologists are qualified. Anthropologists are suspicious because they speak the same language or pro-indigenous people by principle, something like that. So anyway.
Thank you very much. I just saw that we have 3 minutes left, but we started a little bit late, so I think we can have a final round of reflections. There are some other wonderful comments and questions in the chat. One I particularly I think it's very interesting, and one that can bring also conversations forward. Maybe, I don't know if you want to take it to say your final words or just say anything else you'd like, but is how is the perspective and your research on justice contributing to, or our research on justice contributing to make changes in global mainstream science of economics policy, etc., and to allow marginalization? I think that's a very important question. If you want, you have like very few words as final words in this panel.
I can have a go. So I wouldn't say I'm changing the world or the global economics. I want to go back to Joel's example of communities working for their education systems. And I think this is fundamental in terms of achieving cognitive justice. I think my work in particular, I've learned through working with indigenous peoples for a long time that one of the things that they need the most is to revitalize their knowledge systems, precisely to counterbalance the oppression of a knowledge system just that makes their own worldviews invisible. And we can't achieve planetary justice if we don't have mechanisms for other knowledges to be alive. So what I do in my research precisely is I try to be as little as an external researcher as possible. I just use my research as a tool to help communities do their own research on their own knowledge, on their own history, on their own governance systems, helping young indigenous peoples reconnect to their identity and culture, to really make sure that they can push back in some way. And this is something that has emerged out of my relationship with working with indigenous peoples, that they're ask me to help them write books, videos about their oral histories, about their own education systems, around their knowledges, because they feel that if they don't do that, then the younger generations are just not capable of keeping the responsibility that they have towards their lands and territories and environment. So I think I feel very fulfilled that I can use my research as a way of transforming a global and local situation of injustice, particularly of cognitive injustice, which is what I think drives a lot of the discussions around socio-ecological, eco-social, whatever justice that however we're talking about it.
Anyone
Great,
else?
thank you.
I think it's an aspirational goal. I mean, I'm still relatively new in my career, so it's working with communities, indigenous communities in particular, and thinking with ways in which to use the research process as something to facilitate their aspirations and goals and aims is certainly at the forefront of where I'm trying to like push the work that I've been doing and thinking about on a very punctual kind of, or like in a very focused way, thinking with communities that have been struggling to recover portions of their ancestral territories through international human rights mechanisms in the context of agro-extractivism in the Paraguayan Chaco, and thinking about that. And part of that is like helping or accompanying communities in recuperating parts of their histories, and then also providing very practical kind of tools and outputs that communities can then use in their processes. So that could be like maps that they're using that I'm not using, and just being part of those processes to build kind of capacity to share capacity as well. So it's not that I have the capacity and I'm building their capacity, but sharing capacities and seeing where those things come together and what can emerge from that. And I think just as well, like Andrea Bodwafara and I are working together here at Colorado State to try to think with this very provocation and how we might leverage research and training of students and working with practitioners and working with community members and working with other academics and other institutions to move forward in a very kind of deliberate way, a transdisciplinary praxis, if you will, but transdisciplinary in the sense that knowledge creation is centered on working with community partners and producing things that enable and facilitate change on like the local scale with the people with whom we're working and doing our research. And many folks here have much more experience in that, or doing it in a much more complex kind of way, the panelists. And so very excited again to be in conversation with you all, to learn from you. And I also want to say that particularly Gretel Navas, like in the work that they're doing with the Environmental Justice Atlas and at the Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, like it's pretty phenomenal work as well. So it's too bad that we didn't hear from her today, but I also just wanted to flag that because that's another kind of key example of some really interesting initiatives and work there that's going on that I think is really inspirational. So I'll just stop there.
I just posted a book.
Instructions. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I just put a link of a book that also it explains a little bit more what I said. Sorry, Veronica.
No, because I lost Agnes' instructions. My internet just it's final word. Is that it, Agdi? Yeah.
Final
Okay.
word, yes. And
Okay.
please be brief.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because there is a question about good examples of consulta prévia in the region. And I just want to mention that we have been discussing that a little bit. And I agree with you, Andrea, about the limits of participatory process. I mean, it's huge, it's important, we have to talk about that. But at the same time, when indigenous communities, for example, they engage in elaborating those protocols, that's something. And if we learn how to hear that, and if we learn with them what they are saying, not how to fit that in our formal institutions, but what they are saying, I'm not sure, maybe that could be a seed to imagine different institutions, to imagine different relations between different worlds, because it's not like they're going to fit this participatory process. They are trying to show us with that protocol something about their world. So in this relation, that I think that we would maybe learn something.
Yeah. Well, may I react a little bit? Well, maybe I have made it very general. I was speaking about environmental licensing processes, the way people are heard in the process of the installation of large projects, which they are not. And I think that the 169 convention, international convention, is all the process of the protocol is going on here in several in different aspects, and there's a dispute about it as well, a dangerous dispute. The governor of Minas Gerais, the state where I am now, he tried to control the process, to rule the process of the protocol. So there are attempts to control the protocol by the governor of Minas Gerais, by the governor of the Pará in the Amazon, and several other different states, because they argued that they need to rule it, because the international principle is too general and they expect that the processes are ruled internally. Anyway, so I just shared my website here. We have done some mapping, all studies in collaboration with local people, and we have done the map of environmental conflicts in Brazil. We have written reports. We have presented these reports in public hearings. We have presented these reports at the courts, the judicial courts. Of course, people are amazing. They are struggling to save the territories, and some of them are being killed in the process. So we're facing a huge, violent process. I just came back from Maranhão, which is a state in the north of Brazil with quilombolas communities. They're all threatened to death. All leaders threatened to death. And then, so we are participating in meetings with the national government, meetings in international levels, and we are making our testimonies. That's what we can do as researchers, write about it and speak about it whenever we can, and whenever we are invited to do so by the local communities. Sorry, I'm running out of time here and I'm trying to be quick. Not in a good day.
No, thank you. Appreciate your passion. That's very important for justice. Andrea, would you like to have a final, also very, very brief reflection as moderator?
Yes, I can try. I'll try to make it very, very brief, given that each of the questions was itself huge, and trying to compile the answers of all of those. But just to highlight a few of the things that have been coming back in all of y'all's answers and engagement with these topics is the huge imprint of colonialism and colonial legacies in the region that reverberate in our quote unquote democratic systems even today, right? Beyond the extractive nature of the colonial enterprise to exploit resources, nature, territories, there is also this extractive nature in the relation with people, right? As long as nation states or the colonial logic sees people as a dispensable resource and does not invest in, I don't want to say human capital, but in human flourishing, and start seeing the goal of well-being and diversity and justice as the goal, and not something that will be taken care of magically by the market or by increased economic growth or by increased GDP or by these trickling effects of carbon markets. There's a fundamental problem there. So the shift in perspectives and adopting this transformative change, system-wide at different scales change is the huge challenge with the inertia that there is in the current developmental logic. That is the huge challenge. But the flip side, or the beautiful side, is that is already happening at different scales and through different experiences that were outlined, through that are permeated by solidarity, reciprocity, different ways of relating to one another and to other natures, whether that is in agroecological production, of networks of exchange, of taking care of the commons, of, through rural and urban experiences, and through the demands of frontline communities and indigenous movements. Transformative change has been happening for a long time, and it is happening. So I guess it's a way of how do we support those communities in their their quest for increased rights and justice. And here, as researchers, how do we engage in that that practice that goes beyond the traditional roles of academia, that can also be extractive and perpetuate these kind of colonial logics. So, to make it brief, I'll stop there. Just thanking everyone for their time, their participation, and for sharing their decades of experience in collaborating with communities and engaging in this critical way with these topics. Thank you, and to the organizers, everyone who has attended, thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to facilitate and learn from you all.
And on our behalf as well, thank you very much to everybody for putting time and thinking together with us on these questions. We understand they are huge questions, but your answers have been very insightful, very rich. And thank you also for sharing the resources that are open access on the chat. And to everybody also in the audience who participated and listened to us. And we also, as a Planetary Justice Task Force, we appreciate the critical stance that you may have on the concept of planetary justice. And we are exploring ourselves, how can this concept be transformative, under what conditions, and what does a planetary mean? It doesn't necessarily have to be the singular globe, but it can be many other different things. And as Veronica pointed, some ways potentially forward. So thank you very much for your thoughts on that. We are having our next webinar on the 23rd of January, same time. And this time we're exploring views from Western Europe. So we are very curious to see what will come out of that discussion and what kind of things Western European scholars are going to emphasize in this discussion. Yes, so I'm closing it here. This webinar has been recorded and you can download it afterwards. Thank you very much, everybody, and hope to see you in January.
Okay.